So as I was mentioning, communication was one of the challenges for Howard, and so he had a difficult time naming what his greatest challenges were. So when I asked him, looking back on your life, what are some of the greatest challenges that you were able to face, he really wasn't able to name any. He thought about it for a while and he said, overall I've done okay. And while that can be true, it's also true that he's faced some really tough challenges. I expected him to talk about the death of his wife and my grandmother. I expected him to talk about his son-in-law committed suicide, or some of the other challenges that he and their family as well have faced. However, in his head, overall it's been okay, and he wanted to keep those emotions and really challenges to himself. And we did get to explore that a little bit. Really what he named as what was able to keep him going was some of the humor that he would use. And so, as I mentioned before, he used humor as a source of kind of avoiding conflict to an extent, while also being a source of relief and an outlet for him. And so although he did have really a strong support network through his friendships and all of that, it was a challenge for him to still talk openly to even those people that he considered very close to him. And so we can also touch on some of the cultural factors that play into him overcoming the crisis that he is facing during adolescence. And so, as we all know, privilege plays a major role in this, and really in a person's ability to overcome adversity. So while Howard did face adversity, he also had a lot of privilege. And so I think that's something that's really important to identify. And so you can see I have listed he was white, he was male, is male and white. He comes from a middle-class family, and he has an education. And so all of these are privileges that helped him to get ahead in this sense. And so when you look at that picture there, one of my favorite analogies for privilege is that we don't all start at the same place. So if we're looking at life as a race, when we're looking at adversity and all of those things, and some people get a head start, and some people start a few steps behind. And so some of these privileges and some of these identities gave Howard that advantage in being able to get a job, in the way that people treated him, in the way that people viewed him, and in the way that he overcame the crisis of adolescence. So now we can look at his development during adolescence through another theory. And so internal family systems is a theory that I'm just beginning to learn about, and really love the way that they can break down the different parts of a person, and really the complicated nature that entails. And so this model looks at the single person in terms of a family. And so it looks at the person with all of these different parts attached inside of us. And so the child is really like that basic need that we have for us. We have a basic need to belong. And so that's a lot of what this model talks about, is there's a basic need for human beings to belong. And so a lot of times that child inside of us is craving that need to belong and doing what it needs to do to get that need met. And so the way that we get that met is kind of through this next stage that the internal family systems calls the teenager. And so the teenager is really those protective systems and coping mechanisms in a way. And then the final level to that is what we can call the parent, or the true self with capital S. And so that parent figure, we're able to rewire our brain to the way that we're talking to the teenager, talking to the child, talking to the different parts inside of ourselves. And so to exemplify this through Howard's case, he had a basic need for belonging, among other things. And so if we look at his basic need to belong, his protective system, or the teenager inside of him, used those coping mechanisms of humor, of deflection, of avoidance in some cases, in order to protect himself. And so now, as we're talking about those things, the parent, or that self, can come out and identify those protective systems within himself, and do that work inside of himself. So it's a really cool model, because the person is really able to do the work for themselves, and find real healing within themselves. The other aspect to this model that I really like is that it really views the self as allies. And I know for myself and for a lot of other people, we don't always view ourselves as an ally. We are often the person that gives ourselves the most hate, that we have to fight the most, and all of those things, instead of being the one to give ourselves compassion, instead of being the one to give ourselves love, instead of rewiring our brain to think positive thoughts about ourselves. And so through this model, we can see that the teenager, the child, they are all allies fighting for the same thing, wanting to get those basic needs met, and maybe doing it in the wrong way sometimes. And the parent is able to step in and identify those things, and have the teenager speak to, why are you doing these things? What need are you trying to get met? And then you can really find some inner healing that way. So Dr. Richard Schwartz is the one who created this model. And so I really like this quote by him that says, everyone is at their core a self-containing many crucial leadership qualities such as perspective, confidence, compassion, and acceptance. And Schwartz goes on to explain that this capital LS self has 8 C's of self-leadership. And so in the way that they're interacting with the teenagers or the child, these are the qualities that we're really striving for in that parent figure, or capital S self. And those 8 C's are calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, creativity, courage, and connectedness. And the last thing that we're really going to look at here is some of the limitations in Erikson's model when we're looking at development. And so one of the limitations that I saw is that that it relies heavily on self-report. We don't always see ourselves accurately, and so we have to kind of do some digging and sometimes get objective perspective to understand ourselves. And so in this interview and kind of looking at it through this model, a lot of it relies on self-report, and so there's a lot of room for inaccuracy there. And there's a lot of blanks that are hard to fill in because there's things I don't know. I can't look back at Howard's life in his child and teen years and know everything that happened, and I have to rely on what he was able to share with me and explore and fill in some of those blanks with him. The other limitation that I see specifically with Erikson's model is that it kind of puts it in the position to be one or the other and not leave a lot of room for gray area. And so what I mean by that is that we look at this crisis of, did this person overcome this crisis? And if so, they can transition successfully into the next stage. In my opinion, that's not usually the case. There might be parts where we were successful in this crisis, and there might be parts that we were unsuccessful in this crisis. And while we were able to touch on both of those things in the interview and in this presentation, this model gives way to say, did they successfully transition or did they not? and we don't always recognize the dichotomy that exists there, because there's always going to be aspects of us that are taking the unsuccessful aspects of the stage before into the next stage, and there's baggage that we're carrying with, and there's parts that we fail to successfully overcome that transition, and that's something that I think that we're going to have to continue to work on. Browning touches on this in her article, and talks about resolving the crises in life. And Browning recognizes that ideologies represent the concepts that an individual believes in, but that don't match reality. And so that touches on this reality testing that we were talking about earlier, which is what Browning's article is all about. And so, unfortunately, what I don't think that this leaves room for is the power that the ideologies carry. And so those ideologies are not something that we should get rid of, but should hold to even more strongly, because we can both accept those harsh realities and cling to that hope. And so ideologies give us room to be able to do that, to say, it's not perfect, I didn't successfully do all of these things, but I'm going to keep holding on to this in the hope that things can get better and that we're going to continue to progress. And so I think that's something that's important to note in looking at Erikson's theory. The resolution to this stage is what Erikson calls fidelity. I think in many ways Howard did reach fidelity, but I think he lives in that gray area. And there's areas he was able to achieve it, and there's areas where he really still tries to remain in that peacemaker position and doesn't want to bother people or doesn't want to rock the boat per se. And so I think that's where he's continuing to work through the baggage that was left in his adolescence stage, and how that development still affects him today. Thank you for listening, and I am looking forward to continuing to learn more about Erikson's models through evidence presentations.